Are the people that you're utilizing to do work for you employees or contractors? It's extremely important. A lot of the people that become our clients when we investigate have been paying their workers as contractors when in reality they should have been classified as employees. Now today what we will do is go into the difference between employees and contractors. The reason it's so important is that at some point in the future, if you're ever audited by the IRS, or if ever one of your disgruntled or your employees, or excuse me, one of the people you're paying as a contractor become disgruntled, they can actually turn you in and you're going to be liable for a lot of taxes and penalties and interest. What we're going to learn is what the IRS says about contractors and employees, the common law rules which tell you this is what you look at for you to decide whether they're a contractor or an employee. There are such things called statutory employee rules, which means they can be partially a contractor and partially an employee. And if you can't figure it out yourself, what do? The last thing we'll talk about, if you've already paid your workers as contractors, what if you got it wrong? What can you do? Okay. What the IRS says, it is critical that business owners correctly determine whether the individuals providing services are employees or independent contractors. Now, generally, you've got to withhold income taxes, withhold and pay Social Security and Medicare taxes, and pay your state unemployment taxes on wages paid to an employee, if they are, in fact, an employee. You generally don't have to pay any of this or pay any taxes to independent contractors. However, that said, the independent contractor then becomes liable for not only their federal income tax or state income tax, but becomes liable for their Medicare and Social Security. And this is generally one of the reasons that employers get turned into the IRS is because the worker hasn't been paying one or more of those, and they start getting done by the IRS, and then they share with the IRS the fact that they were working for you, but you were not withholding. So what you need to do as you bring someone on to work for you is to decide whether they're employees or contractors. Now, the four categories are independent contractors. These people are independent of you. They're just working for you, and you're paying them X number of dollars to get the job done. You could be paying them hourly or for a job. Then we have common law employees, statutory employees. This is the one that I say they are both a contractor and an employee, and statutory non-employees. So these are the four categories of workers that you could have. Let's start with common law rules that you have got to utilize to show that you truly believed your worker to be a contractor. Now, as we go through these, my recommendation to every employer that has this conundrum about whether they're hiring contractors or employees, to document the reasons that they think they've got contractors. Now, the first thing that we've got to look at is the behavioral part of your worker. Does the company control or have the right to control what the worker does and how the worker does his or her job? So control becomes an issue right off the bat. If you, as an employer, control a lot of what the worker is doing, you might start looking at that worker as an employee. Now, financial. Are the business aspects of the worker's job controlled by the payer? These would include things about how the worker's paid himself, whether the expenses are reimbursed, and who provides the tools and supplies. If you, in fact, provide all the tools and supplies and might even provide a pickup truck for them to drive back and forth, again, you have the control factor here, so you might start looking at this person as an employee. And the type of relationship you have with the worker. Do you have a written contract with the person? Now, most contracts that you enter into to have work done, think about having some work done at your home, you generally have a contract. So is this relationship governed by a contract that you have? Will the relationship continue? Is this a one-time thing? They're coming over to install some plumbing, and it's a one-time thing. As soon as they get it installed, their job is over? Or do you have them going out on jobs that you have procured installing plumbing? If you're doing that, they're going to be an employee. There's no magic or set number of factors that makes a worker an employee or an independent contractor. No one factor, behavioral, financial, or the type of relationship stands alone. You've got to consider all three. Your key is to look at the entire relationship to consider the degree or extent of the right to direct and control, and that is the magic words right there. Do you have the right to direct this person and control this person, or are you hiring a contractor that is supposed to do that? And finally, again, I encourage you, if there is any question in your mind, to document each of the factors in coming to the decision that you've made if you consider this person to be a contractor. The next area is a statutory employee, and I've listed some things there that create the relationship of a statutory employee, the driver who distributes commodities, except for milk. Now, I don't know why that's in there. I guess a lobby somewhere. Or someone that picks up and delivers laundry or dry cleaning. A full-time life insurance sales agent. You can read the rest there. If workers are independent contractors, under the common law rules, such workers may be treated as employees by statute for certain employment tax purposes if they fall within any one of the four categories you see up above there. And then they need to meet three conditions also. You need to withhold Social Security and Medicare taxes from the wages of statutory employees if the service contract states or implies that substantially all of the services are to be performed by them. They do not have a substantial investment in the equipment, so you're supplying the tools or the truck for them to use, and property used to perform the services other than an investment in transportation facilities. And the services are performed on a continuing basis for the same taxpayers. So if you believe them to be a statutory employee, you can pay them as a contractor, the only exception being that you need to withhold and pay your Social Security and Medicare tax. Now, there are also statutory non-employees. There are three categories: a direct seller, a licensed real estate agent, or companion setters. And these companion setters are not employees of a companion setting placement service. All three of these are treated as self-employed for all federal tax purposes, including income and employment taxes, if substantially all payments for their services as direct sellers or real estate agents are direct to sales or other output rather than to the number of hours worked. So you're paying them on a commission as opposed to by the hour. And their services are performed under a written contract providing that they will not be treated as employees for federal tax purposes. So for a statutory non-employee, you need to have a contract spelling out the fact that they are non-employees. And I believe if you Google statutory non-employees, you can probably find a boilerplate document for this. Now, if you're a business with employees, contractor, you've got to have them fill out a W-9. This is an IRS form. And the W-9, it requests the taxpayer identification number. So the contractor that you have should have a Social Security number or an EIN number. And you keep the W-9 in your files for 4 years after you file your taxes. At the end of the year, if you've paid this person more than $600, you need to fill out a Form 1099 miscellaneous, and you supply one copy to them, one copy to the IRS, and you keep a copy. Now, there are certain situations where a 1099 is not required, but they were too numerous for me to list in this program. You can find them at www.irs.gov. Businesses with employees, well, first of all, you've got to be a bona fide business. You have got to have a Social Security from the employee and an INS form substantiating their legal right to work in this country. You, as the employer, must have an EIN number from the IRS with which to pay your taxes. At the end of the year, for an employee, of course, you list the form that shows their income. Now, it's complicated. It's very complicated. And what happens if you can't figure it out? Well, the IRS understands it is complicated, and they've got a Form SS8, which you can list everything on for a worker. They themselves will review the facts and circumstances, and they'll send you an official determination. But they're so far behind, this may take up to 6 months to get this. And here's the problem. The problem is that if you've misclassified them, particularly if you are calling them a contractor when in fact the IRS says no, they're an employee, then you're going to be liable for the taxes and interest that should have been withheld as an employee that you did not withhold because they were a contractor. Now, other consequences, you've got two avenues. After you get an answer from your SS8 and know that you've misclassified some contractors, you can request a Section 530, and this is called a 530 relief. And it's only for the current tax year. You make an adjustment to the federal income tax withholding and the FICA tax so that the amount withheld and paid is correct by the end of the calendar year. You must also pay federal unemployment tax on these people and probably state tax on these. Now, if you need to go back further than 1 year to use Section 3509 before you can report the additional employment tax on your Form 941, try to see from the IRS if you qualify for the reduced rates that you need to pay under IRC Section 3509. And at this point, you're going to need to get a professional involved, whether that professional is an accountant or an attorney. You have a one-time and one-time only opportunity to correct your tax treatment of your previously misclassified employees. Now, if you qualify for this 3509, you can't recover any tax you pay under the provision from your employees. You're going to have to pay it all yourself. But if you qualify, you're going to owe, but at a reduced rate, the employee's share of the FICA taxes, the federal income taxes that should have previously been withheld. You're still going to be responsible for the employer's share of the FICA taxes in full. You're also going to need to file the necessary W-2 with the IRS to issue corrected information returns to your workers. When I was growing up, I grew up in a little town. We had a Greyhound bus station there. And the people that ran the bus station, and this was years ago, had a couple ladies that they hired for 2 different shifts to keep the bus station clean. They didn't pay any overtime. They didn't pay anything that they withheld taxes on or anything else. And a new attorney came to town and started advising the 2 ladies. And the 2 ladies called the IRS or wrote the IRS and said, hey, we're over here. We don't have any Social Security. We're not being paid overtime. We think we're getting hammered. IRS investigated, and sure enough. Now, this had been going on for years. So when the IRS sent out a determination letter, the poor people, I shouldn't say poor people because they were wrong all of the time, but the people that owned the bus station didn't have enough money to pay all of these taxes. They had to file bankruptcy. So be careful, because if you get caught from a disgruntled employee, and anybody, even your best friend, can become disgruntled in the future, be careful. So when the 3509 special rates don't apply, you've got to deduct the FICA tax from your later wages if they're still an employee. But again, you can't recover under withheld income tax for a prior year. You're liable yourself to pay the underpayment of the FICA tax, whether it is or was or not withheld or recovered from the employees. In addition to having to pay these taxes, you may have to pay a penalty that runs anywhere from 2% to 25% of the unpaid taxes. And in addition, interest is accruing from the date they should have been withheld and paid to the IRS until the date that you pay them. So it becomes quite onerous, and I would highly recommend that if you think that you've got any employees or any workers that you're classifying as a contractor and there's any doubt in your mind, that you get a hold of your accountant right away and go through it together. That's why you're paying your accountant. Go through it together and see what they think. Then you can make a rational decision. Okay, the takeaways from today is what should your workers be classified as? And we had 4 different classifications. Why is it important to get it right? Because your consequences are going to be, could be huge if you chose to classify somebody as a contractor when they should have been an employee. If you have contractors working for you, what do you file? Well, at the end of the year, a 1099 with the contractor if you've paid them more than $600. Is it necessary to have a personnel file for my employees? Now, I didn't cover that, but I want to right now, in that I think it's extremely important for employees that you have a personnel file which includes their application for employment, all of the forms they're going to file for both the IRS and the INS, and in this, in the future, you're going to keep any of your documentation about the quality of work that they're doing. If you can't figure out how your workers should be classified, what do I do? Well, the IRS has a special form. And again, what is the consequences? It's heavy. Our next webinar is again an extremely important and extremely misunderstood part of the taxes, and it's estimated taxes. When should you pay them? Do you have to pay them? So next week, Thursday at 7:30 in the morning, we will present this webinar, and we hope you're with us. Thanks for attending today. We really appreciate it. Bye-bye.